When you find out fairy tales are lies, the pain cuts deeper, because you believed them first. That's how Isolde's stories always began. And that's how her life began too, with a lie she'd chosen to believe. She was born into a family of wolves. Every last one of them could shift. Her mother, her father, her little sister Bryn, all of them could shed their skin under the moon and run as something wild and beautiful and free. Except Isolde. She stayed human, trapped in one shape her whole life, a single skin and no way out of it. They called her defective before she could even walk. And when she grew up, when a man finally took her as his mate, she thought foolishly, hopefully, that maybe the word would stop following her. It didn't. 5 years she stayed in his house. 5 years of trying, of praying, of watching her own body refuse to do the one thing it was supposed to do. No child came. Not one. And when the 5th year turned cold, he sent her back to her father's cottage, the way you'd hand back a borrowed thing you'd found wanting. Barren, they called her now. Barren and wolfless and worth nothing to anyone. Her family's shame, twice over. So you can understand why she loved stories. Stories were the only place a girl like Isolde ever got a happy ending. In the stories, the plain girl was secretly a princess. The overlooked one was chosen. The one everyone had given up on turned out never to have been the problem at all. She kept a small stack of books hidden under a loose floorboard, read them by candlelight when the house was asleep. And she told herself night after night that maybe a kind fairy would come one day. Maybe magic would find her. Maybe her empty life would fill up with something warm. But hope is a treacherous thing, because when it finally breaks, you don't just grieve what you lost. You grieve the dreaming too. And the day the tax collector came, that was the day the dreaming ended. He filled the whole doorway, blocked out the sun. A beta wolf broad as an ox with golden eyes that caught the dim light of their little cottage and threw it back cold. Isolde watched from the shadows by the hearth the way she'd learned to small, still unnoticed. Her father held Bryn against his chest, held her tight like the beta might reach out and take the girl right there. "The taxes have doubled this season," the beta said. His voice rolled through the tiny room like distant thunder. "By order of Alpha King Corwin." Her father shook. He always shook, that man. Around anyone bigger than him. "My lord." His voice cracked down the middle. "We've had a poor harvest. If you could grant us more time, you know the penalty." And then the beta's eyes moved, slow, deliberate. They landed on Bryn, 16 years old, trembling, pressing her face into their father's shirt. "The king requires new slaves," he said. "This one will do." Isolde felt the whole room go tight, like a rope pulled to snapping. Because everyone knew what happened to Corwin's slaves. They walked into that white castle and they were never seen again. Swallowed whole. Gone. "She's promised to be mated," their father said, fast, desperate. "She's got a strong wolf in her. She'll bear powerful cubs for the pack." And then he stopped. He stopped, and Isolde felt it before she saw it. Felt his eyes crawl across the room to where she stood in the dark. "Take my eldest instead." There it was. The beta turned, looked at her the way you'd look at spoiled meat. "You'd offer the king a defective half-breed. She's already proven useless for breeding." Her father said it plain, flat, like reading a price off a list. "Her own mate cast her off. She's practically human. No loss to the pack." No loss to the pack. She'd heard it 100 times. You'd think 101 wouldn't sting. It did. The beta studied her, and something in his gaze made her skin crawl, something calculating like a man doing sums in his head. "What is she worth? What can she be used for?" "She tells stories," Bryn blurted out, then shrank back the second the beta's eyes cut toward her. "Beautiful stories. She does." Isolde closed her eyes. Because how many times had they mocked that, called her storytelling a shameful human habit, beneath the dignity of their kind. And now they held it up like it was the only jewel she owned, the only thing worth trading. Her father grabbed her arm and shoved her to her knees on the cold floor. "Show him. Tell him yourself." She lifted her head, slowly, and a strange, bitter clarity settled over her. "Because as a slave she thought, no one will ever expect me to bear a child. No one will measure me by an empty womb ever again." I would be honored, she said. He said to serve Alpha King Corwin in any way he wishes, my lord. The beta looked at her a long moment, then he nodded. Very well, the defective one will do. Outside he shifted dark fur, rippling out over massive limbs, the change taking him in seconds, the way it never took her at all. And as he led her away down the dirt road, Isolde did not look back at the cottage. She'd learned that a long time ago. Stories were the only escape that had ever mattered. And tonight, wherever they put her, she'd tell herself one. A story where her family fought for her, where her father regretted this, where being different didn't mean being cast off. She was good at happy endings, even the ones that never came true, especially those. The castle rose out of the morning like something out of one of her books. White marble towers catching the sun so bright it hurt to look at. It was more beautiful than anything she'd ever imagined. And that was exactly what frightened her. Because Isolde knew her stories. And in the stories, the most beautiful things always hid the darkest secrets. They didn't take her through the grand front gates. Of course they didn't. The beta shifted back to a man gripped her arm and marched her down a narrow side path, down and down underground into a chamber of chilly gray stone where 5 other girls were already huddled together, shaking, wide-eyed. Isolde kept her face blank. She wouldn't let them see she was afraid too. Strip. A stern woman stood in the corner. Iron gray hair, amber wolf eyes, a mouth set like a trap. Marta the others would later call her. The girls hesitated. You're the king's property now. Marta's voice snapped like a whip. Whatever you thought was yours, including your dignity, belongs to him. One by one they undressed, shivering in the cold. Isolde folded her clothes into a neat little square. Slow, careful, refusing to hurry, refusing to let this woman see her flinch. Then came the water. Ice cold thrown by the bucketful, stealing the breath right out of her lungs. Rough hands scrubbed her raw with coarse soap, washed her hair twice and combed it till her scalp burned. The king won't have village filth in his castle, Marta said, watching them all suffer with something that looked a lot like pleasure. Though I doubt any of you last the month. You're hardly the beauties he prefers. One girl started to cry. Save your tears, Marta said. King Corwin isn't known for mercy. They were given plain gray shifts, told the rules, who to speak to, where never to go, and what happened to girls who forgot. And then Marta's voice dropped, low, almost careful. Tonight one of you will serve the king's special guest. The way she said it, special guest, like the words tasted wrong in her mouth. Isolde's stomach turned to stone, because her mind, her storyteller's mind, always running, always spinning, worst cases into pictures filled in the blanks. A sacrifice, a monster, a girl offered up to something hungry. The king himself will choose which of you gets the honor, Marta finished, and she looked them over like cuts of meat at market. Try not to embarrass yourselves. They were led up a narrow stair to a small room with a polished floor, told to line up, keep your eyes down. And then the footsteps came. Isolde felt the change in the room before she understood it. Marta cruel iron-spined. Marta went rigid. Her confidence just evaporated. A guard pressed a rough hand to the back of Isolde's neck and forced her head lower. His Majesty, Alpha King Corwin. The marble floor seemed to hum under her bare feet with every step he took. She kept her eyes fixed on the stone. But the air grew heavy, thick, charged with a power that pressed against her skin like a hand. The new arrivals, Your Majesty, a man said, his voice tight, for your special guest's requirements. Silence. A long, long silence. She could hear the girl beside her breathing in little frightened gasps. They're all cowering. A deep voice. It moved through her bones, and it held no cruelty in it. That was the strange part. No cruelty, no kindness. Just a tired, worn-down disappointment. Like this was exactly what he'd expected. How tiresome. And something in that voice, the ease of it, the casual weight of it, made it impossible for Isolde not to look. Because in every book she'd ever hidden under that floorboard, kings and princes were painted with such grandeur. And she'd always wondered, could any real man ever match the ones in the stories Curiosity won? It always did with her. She raised her eyes, and every hero she'd ever read about faded to a pale smudge. Corwin wasn't handsome. Handsome was too small a word for ordinary men. He was carved. High cheekbones sharp enough to cut a mouth curved with a natural faint mockery, a body broader and stronger than any wolf she'd known. It was a savage kind of beauty, the kind no artist could ever get right. But his eyes. Something ancient lived in his eyes. Something feral and old and terribly, terribly tired. And then those eyes snapped to hers. She dropped her gaze to the floor so fast her neck ached, heart slamming, caught looking. Your Majesty, the attendant prompted. Have you made your selection? She felt his attention settle on her, felt it like a weight pinning her to the spot. She'll do, he said. She didn't have to look up to know. He was pointing at her. The oak door was enormous, and the air in front of it was cold, winter cold, though it was still warm season outside. The torches on the wall bent their flames away from the door, like even the fire was trying to get free. Marta stood beside her, and for the first time the woman's hands were shaking too. Please the king's guest, she whispered. However he desires. Or tomorrow you'll wish you had. Her voice stumbled on the word guest. The guard at the door had sweat on his brow despite the cold. When Isolde caught his eye, he looked away, his hand tightened on his sword. And from inside the room came a sound, something between a growl and a sigh, low, wrong. It seemed to move through the wood of the door and into the marrow of her. The guard shoved her forward, the door swung shut behind her. Except it wasn't a room. It was a whole suite vast and dim, and the air inside was thick with scent spices, flowers, and underneath it something wilder. Musk. Blood. The strange, sharp tang of magic. A mirror hung on one wall. When she turned toward it, her reflection seemed to waver, reluctant to hold its shape. Is anyone there? She asked. Someone was watching. She could feel it. A gaze on her skin heavy as a hand laid on her shoulder. She stepped forward, and another step. And there a banquet spread across a long table, roasted meat bowls of bright fruit golden candelabra, throwing light that couldn't quite reach the corners. She didn't dare touch a thing. Behind velvet curtains at the back of the room she found the bed. Enormous, absurdly wide, draped in silk. And she understood. The knowing looks, the nervous guard, the feast, the perfume, the bed. Good grief, she was meant to be used, offered up like a dish to whatever the king kept in this room. Her stomach heaved. She pressed a hand hard to her mouth, but then she saw the package on the bed, and on it a card, her name written in fine curling script. Her name. Someone had written her name. With dread pooling low in her belly, she unwrapped it. A gown spilled into her hands, midnight dark shot through with gold thread shimmering like a piece of the night sky torn loose. Beautiful. Horribly, horribly beautiful. Like a shroud made of stars. The air went colder still, as if the dark itself were leaning in. Behind her footsteps, slow, deliberate, the scrape of claws on stone, the pop of joints, the shift of something enormous moving in the dark. A low groan quickly swallowed. She turned. The shadows had thickened, a patch of black that ate the candlelight whole. Put it on, the voice came from that dark, deep, inhuman, language forced through a throat never built for it. She swallowed, retreated behind a dressing screen with trembling fingers. The fabric slid over her skin like cool water. There was a necklace too, a collar of diamond stars. Should I wear this as well? She whispered. Silence. Then closer now. Yes. She clasped it at her throat. It felt like a weight meant to hold her under. She stepped out from behind the screen. The room seemed empty, but the presence stayed. Please, eat, the dark said. She took a piece of bread. Her fingers barely trembled, barely, she told herself. The rich taste turned to ash in her mouth. A shadow fell across the table. Do you like the dress? Yes, she managed. Stand. Her knees wobbled. She obeyed. And the thing came forward, revealed a hand. Except it wasn't a hand. It was a huge, grotesque appendage, long fingers ending in claws like knives. Turn around, it said. She did. Slowly. Her eyes traveled up. and up, and still up. The sight of it staggered her. A figure too massive, too twisted for this world. A muzzle full of jagged teeth. A body bent by what looked like years of agony and fury. Her lips parted. A scream built in her chest. And instead of a scream, what came out was, "Were you cursed?" The beast recoiled, like she'd struck it. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "That was presumptuous." "No." The voice was quieter now, almost undone. "How did you know?" She hesitated. "I've read many stories about curses. There's one a prince twisted into brambles by a jealous witch, and another where a queen's cruelty turned her to stone from the heart out slow over 100 years, and—" She stopped herself. "I'm rambling, forgive me." "No." The gaze locked onto her. "Go on." So she did, because what else did she have? One tale then another, of monsters and spells and men buried alive inside something terrible, of humanity hiding under horror. And the strangest thing happened as she spoke. When she told the cruel parts, the witch's spite, the villagers throwing stones, the beast stirred, shifted. A low sound rolled out of it, pained, restless, like the words themselves were pressing on an old wound. But when she turned to mercy, to the servant girl who fed the cursed prince anyway, to the child who saw past the fur, to the frightened boy, the beast went still, quiet, almost peaceful. She noticed. She was a storyteller. Noticing was the whole of her trade, and she thought there's a person in there, a person who remembers being one. Hours passed. The candles guttered low. "Thank you," the beast rumbled at last, softer than before, almost reluctant. "For your company." Relief flooded through her. She had survived the night, on the only thing she'd ever owned, stories. Then, the beast said, "Will you be my wife?" Her breath stopped. I cannot," she whispered, horrified. The beast rose, towered. "Then I have no use for you." And the finality in those words iced straight down her spine. Would the king have her killed for displeasing his monster? Panic clawed at her throat. But her storyteller's mind moved faster than her fear. It always had. It was the one part of her that had never once failed. "I am held by those who cannot touch me," she blurted, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "Broken by those who never speak me, kept by those who never sought me. Kings command me, but I command fate. What am I?" The beast paused, its great head tilting. "What is this?" it growled. "A riddle." Her voice steadied. "From a story I know." She lifted her chin, summoned every scrap of courage she had left in her. "Solve it and I will be yours, freely, gladly. But until you do, will you let me come back and tell you more stories?" The creature stared at her for what felt like a year. Then it exhaled, long, slow. "Tomorrow night," it said. "Do not be late." When Isolde came back down to the servants' quarters, the room went silent. The other girls pressed against the walls as she crossed the stone floor, as if she carried a sickness, as if surviving that room had marked her. Marta caught her arm, surprising strength in those old fingers, and pulled her into a small alcove away from the others. "You're alive." She hissed it like an accusation. "How?" Then cut herself off, glanced over her shoulder afraid. "Say nothing to anyone, not a word. Do you understand? The king will see you at noon." Isolde only nodded, but she noticed how the woman's hands trembled, how the whole careful order of this place seemed to shake because one broken girl had walked back out of that room alive. Sleep wouldn't come. She lay in the dark, chasing amber eyes and unanswered riddles across the inside of her eyelids. She was jolted awake by rough hands, the sun already high. "The king demands you," the guard said, flat. "Now." He led her through a maze of corridors, upstairs she'd never climbed, to a private study, not a throne room, but a room lined floor to ceiling with books. And there, against a tall window full of morning light, stood King Corwin. Two others were in the room. Nessa, a servant girl who wouldn't meet her eyes, and a warrior of a man, the king's beta, she guessed. Garrick. Corwin watched her come in, studied her with a cold, careful calculation. And up close in the daylight, his beauty was sharper, almost cruel. Not a single flaw on him. as though the gods had carved him from marble and forgotten to leave anything human behind. "So," he said, "velvet over steel. You met my guest. What did you think of him?" She lowered her gaze, bowed her head. "He was generous to me, Your Majesty, as were you, for choosing me." A flicker crossed his face. Curiosity, or was it suspicion? "And that's all you have to say? Your guest has asked for me again tonight." Soft, careful. "If it pleases you." He moved closer. Predatory. The whole room seemed to lean away from him. "Will you go?" "If it pleases Your Majesty." "I am indifferent," he said, "to whether you or another entertains that thing." That thing. She couldn't hide the way she flinched, and he saw it. Of course he saw it. "Does my choice of words disturb you, slave?" He leaned in. "What word would you use for such a horrid beast?" The room tensed. "Your Majesty may use whichever word he pleases," she said carefully. And then she couldn't help it, although even beasts are owed some respect. Garrick's breath hissed in. Nessa went pale. Respect. Corwin's pupils narrowed to slits. "That beast is a stain on my castle. I show it respect enough by keeping it alive and fed." She bowed lower, said nothing. "The gown, the jewels, return them to Nessa." He circled her each step, measured out like a threat. "Everything in this castle belongs to me. I'll not have a slave dressed like a queen." She nodded. "And should you breathe one word of that beast to anyone—" His voice dropped to a whisper that raised the hair on her arms. "I will know, and I will have you killed. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Majesty." He studied her a moment longer, then waved his hand. "Get her out of my sight." She scrubbed floors that afternoon, fingers raw from lye soap and cold water, knees aching on the stone. Nessa followed her from room to room, pointing at spots that weren't there. "Missed one. Start again." And the other servants had gone from curious to something uglier. She heard the whispers as she passed. "Disease carrier. That's why she's still breathing. He wants to see how long it takes. Thinks she's better than us now." Isolde bore it in silence. Being alone was nothing new. She'd been alone her whole life. This was just a bigger, colder house to be alone in. But that night she found something. Because when the door to the beast's chamber opened again, and the feast was laid, and the gown was waiting with her name on the card, she noticed a door at the back she hadn't seen before, cracked open, a thread of candlelight spilling out, and her storyteller's curiosity, which had never once known when to leave well enough alone, pulled her toward it. She pushed it open, a small round chamber, and on the far wall a portrait, a child. A little boy, maybe 6 years old, painted in fine oils, standing stiff and proud in a small blue coat. Golden hair. And eyes, golden eyes, warm and clever and alive. Someone had taken a knife to it, slashed it again and again straight across the face the way you'd hurt a thing you hated. But not enough to hide the eyes. Isolde had seen those eyes twice now. Once in the daylight, cold and cruel and carved from marble, and once in the dark, trapped inside something monstrous aching to be seen. She stood very still in that little room, the candle trembling in her hand, and a thought rose up in her, quiet and enormous and impossible. What if they were the same, the night that pitied her and the day that despised her? What if they had always been the same man? Behind her in the dark of the outer room, the great chair creaked. "Isolde," the beast called, low, weary, almost tender. "You're late." She closed the door on the ruined little boy, and she turned back toward the dark, her heart pounding out a rhythm she didn't yet have a name for. "Forgive me," she said. "I have a story for you tonight." She just wasn't sure anymore whose story it was. She didn't tell him what she'd seen. Not that night. Not for many nights after. Because a secret like that, you don't just set it down on the table between you. You carry it. You turn it over in the dark. You wait to be sure. And Isolde wasn't sure. Not yet. So she did what she'd always done. She told him stories. And she watched. The weeks folded into one another. And her life split cleanly in two the way his did. By day she was a slave. Knees on cold stone, fingers cracked from lie. Nessa trailing her, pointing at floors that gleamed already. The other servants murmuring as she passed, their words like little stones thrown at her back. But by night, oh, by night she was a storyteller with the finest audience she'd ever had. The beast waited for her every evening, a feast laid out that she rarely touched, a gown with her name on the card, though after that first week, the jewels stopped coming, and she understood without either of them saying it that he'd remembered Corwin's own order and quietly worked around it, kept her out of trouble, spared her one small danger, which was a strange thing for a monster to do. Remember a cruelty someone else had spoken, bend himself around it to protect her. She filed it away with everything else she was collecting. What tale tonight, he'd rumble, folding that enormous twisted body into a chair built for a man, and she'd begin. But she'd learned a trick. She always stopped a story just before the end. Left the hero dangling off the cliff, the lovers a breath apart, the riddle one turn from solved. And then he'd press. Tomorrow, she'd say, with the smallest smile, because a story unfinished is a reason to come back. And somewhere in those weeks, she couldn't say exactly when, coming back had stopped being a sentence and started being the thing she looked forward to all day, down on her aching knees. Then one night she came empty-handed. "I'm not sure I have a story tonight," she admitted. "I've told you all the ones I know." The beast tilted his great head. "You always have a story." "The books in my village were few. My father wouldn't spend coin on more." She hesitated. "I could tell you one of mine, if you'd like." The beast went very still. "Yours." And that was the night everything changed, because she stopped reciting and started making. She spun a tale out of nothing right there in the dark, and the beast. The beast leaned in. He questioned her, argued with her. Why would the princess trust him after he was so cruel to her? "Because sometimes," Isolde said, "we see past what a person has done, to who they truly are." The beast grew quiet. "And you believe that? That a person can change so completely?" "I believe a person can finally show who they were all along." She chose the words carefully. "Sometimes cruelty is only armor." His golden eyes fixed on her, and when he spoke his voice had dropped low. "You speak like someone who knows armor." She did. She knew the armor of indifference she'd worn when her mate turned her out. The armor of stillness she'd worn when her father offered her up like a chipped bowl. But she only smiled and went on with the tale. They talked longer and longer after that. Sunset to the small, dark hours before dawn. Sometimes she caught herself laughing at his dry, grim little observations. Sometimes he made a low sound in his chest, something almost like pleasure at a clever turn in her story. And one night he surprised her. "I have something for you," he said, and rose. He led her through a door she'd never seen, not the little room with the ruined portrait. Another one, and there it was. A round chamber lined floor to ceiling with books, a writing desk by the window, fine parchment, quills, ink. A library. She turned in a slow circle, her breath gone. "For me. You said your father never bought you books." The beast almost sounded shy. "I thought, perhaps, you'd like to read new stories, write your own." Tears stung her eyes. Sudden, hot. No one had ever given her anything. Not one thing her whole life that was hers. "Thank you," she whispered. "And she thought a monster gave me this. A monster who's supposed to be a stain on this castle. A monster who hides gifts behind unmarked doors and bends himself quietly around another man's cruelty." And she thought of the portrait, the little boy with the golden eyes. She said nothing, but the secret got heavier. Their nights grew richer. She'd read to him from her own pages, and he'd tear the stories apart with the gentlest hands. "Your heroine forgives too easily," he said one night. "No one forgives like that." Perhaps she's learned that holding the anger hurts her more than the one who wronged her. Or perhaps she's simply afraid of being alone again. She looked up, startled, because he'd reached straight through the story and touched the truest thing in it. "Maybe both," she admitted. He leaned forward. The chair groaned. "Tell me about her. Why does forgiveness come so easy to someone who's been so hurt? Her hands went still in her lap. She was cast aside, she said quietly, by someone meant to love her, told she was worthless. So when someone finally shows her kindness, she's terrified of losing it. Why was she cast aside? The question hung there, and Isolde, who had told 1,000 stories to keep from telling her own, felt it rise in her throat anyway. She couldn't give him the one thing he wanted. Barely a whisper. A child. She tried for 5 years. Her body wouldn't cooperate. So he sent her home, like something that had broken in his hands. The beast drew a sharp breath. She heard it. "I was a fool," he said, and his voice was rough and low and shaking with something fierce. To throw away someone precious, for something she couldn't help. Was he? Tears blurred him into shadow. In our world, what is a woman who can't bear pups? What is she good for? The beast rose, paced to the window. She tells stories that make the dark bearable, he said. She sees the soul under the monster. She brings light into rooms that have only ever known shadow. He turned. That is what she's good for. She wiped her eyes. At least now you won't want to marry me, she said with a broken little laugh. Now that you know how the world sees me. The beast whirled around, his whole vast twisted frame trembling. Isolde, her name in that ruined voice. I would count myself the most fortunate creature alive if you would have me. Child or no child, you are... He stopped, caught himself. You are worth more than a kingdom of queens who have everything except your gentle heart. Heat rushed to her face, her chest ached, because no one in all her years had ever spoken to her like she was something to be treasured, rather than something to be tolerated. You don't have to say such things, she stammered. To be kind. I'm not being kind, his voice cracked. I'm being honest. And she ducked her head, undone by the weight of how he looked at her. For the first time in her life, Isolde was happy. Except one thing still shadowed it. One question every night at the end. Will you be my wife? And every night the same answer. The riddle. Her held breath refusal dressed up as a game. I am held by those who cannot touch me, broken by those who never speak me, kept by those who never sought me. Kings command me, but I command fate. What am I? At first she'd been afraid he'd punish her for it. Now what haunted her was different. Now it was the way his golden eyes flashed with raw, silent hurt each time she said it. And she couldn't tell him why she couldn't say yes. Couldn't tell him that when she imagined those massive, misshapen limbs beside her in a marriage bed, her whole body went cold with a fear older than her mind. She loved the person in the dark. She was afraid of the shape he wore, and she hated herself a little for both. The riddle, the refusal, the dawn, and then another day, until the day it broke. It happened by accident, the way the biggest things always do. One morning, instead of scrubbing floors, she was led to a small chamber all her own. A desk, a chair, blank parchment and quills, and a pot of ink. His Majesty says you're to spend your days here now, Nessa muttered, not looking at her. Readying yourself for your nightly duties. Isolde stared. I'm to write, whatever keeps that thing entertained. And Nessa left her there, alone, with the most precious gift she'd ever been handed. His Majesty says. His Majesty, who despised the beast, who'd sneered the word thing and threatened to kill her for a whisper. That same king had ordered paper and time and quiet, so a slave could write stories for a monster he claimed to loathe. Why would a man do that? For a creature he hated. Unless... She didn't finish the thought. She was afraid to. That night she carried her pages to the beast's chamber, and her hands for once weren't steady. I wrote something different tonight, she said. May I read it to you? The beast settled across from her. Please. Once there lived a girl born without a wolf. Her voice wavered. In a village where everyone could shift. She alone stayed human, trapped in a single skin. The beast went still. Her father called her wrong. Her sister pretended in front of others not to know her. The village children threw stones and called her half-breed. She swallowed. And each night she escaped into stories, built worlds where she belonged, where being different wasn't a curse. Her voice found its strength. No one ever asked to hear those stories. No one cared about the worlds she built word by careful word. Those who scorned her, the beast interrupted, for lacking a wolf were fools. A wolf is nothing next to a mind that builds worlds. She looked up. Is that how the story ends? I don't know yet, she admitted. Silence stretched between them, full of something she couldn't name. Today, she whispered, for the first time in my life, someone gave my stories worth. Someone asked the king who despises me, to give me time, and space, and paper, to write. Her voice broke clean in half. No one has ever seen me before, not once, not until you. The beast's great claws flexed and relaxed, as if he wanted more than anything to reach for her, and didn't dare. I see nothing but you, Isolde. The way he said her name went straight through her. Will you be my wife? And this time, she didn't give the riddle right away. This time she looked at him, truly looked, at the twisted limbs, the scarred hide, the terrible teeth, and past all of it to the mind she'd come to know, the gentle wit, the careful way he never once pushed when she said no. The silence stretched, heavy with something that felt almost like a yes. Isolde, he asked, soft, hopeful, breaking her heart, and the old fear rose up, and she reached for the riddle like a hand reaching for a railing on a dark stair. I am held by those who cannot touch me, she whispered, broken by those who never speak me, kept by those who never sought me. What am I? His shoulders dropped, defeat plain and quiet. She left that night heavier than she'd ever left before. Sleep wouldn't come. She lay in the dark and turned her whole life over. The crushing loneliness of being the only one who couldn't shift. The silence when she walked into a room. The way her father's eyes had always slid past her as if looking straight at his defective daughter might make her real. And then the beast who listened, who gave her paper, who called her storytelling more precious than a wolf's strength, who worked in the shadows to spare her one small dignity. She remembered his question about her heroine. Why forgive someone who hurt you? Because sometimes we see past what a person has done, to who they truly are. And she sat straight up in the dark. Because wasn't that exactly it? Wasn't that exactly what had happened here? She had seen past the monster, to the soul inside, and he had seen her, truly seen her, when no one else in her whole life had bothered to look. The truth crashed over her like a wave breaking. She loved him, not with the careful warmth you feel for a friend, but with the deep, certain recognition of finding someone who spoke the language of your heart without translation. She had to tell him. Now. Before dawn. Before her courage failed. Before one more day passed with the answer to his question locked behind her teeth. She slipped out into the corridor. The castle silent in the last dark hour. The guard at the beast's door slumped against the wall, snoring soft. She stepped past him. Inside, the first gray light of morning was just beginning to seep through the heavy curtains. The beast lay asleep on the great bed, his huge chest rising, falling. She would wake him. She would say yes. She would be his wife. She crossed the room, and then the first ray of sun broke over the sill, and the beast's body convulsed. A groan tore out of him, his limbs twisted. The fur receded, pulled back into skin. Bones cracked and reshaped themselves with a sound that turned her stomach. Isolde pressed both hands to her mouth, because where the beast had been, King Corwin now lay, his perfect marble face slack with sleep, his chest rising and falling steady and calm, the same eyes, the same voice. She'd known. Some part of her had known since the portrait. But knowing a thing and seeing it are not the same, and seeing it stole the breath clean out of her. His eyes snapped open. For one heartbeat, one single unguarded heartbeat. He smiled at her. A real smile. It transformed his severe face into something so beautiful it hurt. Then awareness came. His gaze cut to the sunlight, back to her face, and the smile died. You weren't supposed to see this, he said. Hollow. Your Majesty, she whispered. You're. He sat up slowly, resignation settling over him like a shroud. A witch's curse. He wouldn't look at her. By day, the king everyone fears. By night, the monster everyone pities. Neither of them the man I was. I came to say yes. The words tumbled out of her. I was coming to accept. I was. Enough. He cut her off. And there was something worse than anger in it. Something like grief. Now that you know whatever you feel is spoiled, you've seen both halves, you love a king, not a beast. But I didn't know when I decided. It doesn't matter. He turned away from her, toward the window and the rising sun. You should go. Here's the thing she learned that morning that she would carry a long time. The cruelest word he could have said wasn't go, it was spoiled. Because he thought her love was worth less now that she knew he was beautiful. He thought she could only have loved the monster in ignorance. He could not imagine this man carved so perfect feared by an entire kingdom that she might love the tender thing in the dark on purpose, and love the marble king too, and understand at last that they were only ever one aching person wearing two skins because a curse had split him down the middle. He could not imagine being loved for himself. And that Isolde thought was the loneliest thing she had ever seen, lonelier than her own life, lonelier than anything in any book. But she wasn't given time to say so. There was more she'd learn in the days that followed in fragments and whispers before they sent her away. She learned it from Marta of all people who came to her that final morning with her iron face gone soft and strange. The girls, Marta said low. The ones who came before you. The ones the castle says vanished. Isolde's heart went cold. The ones he killed. He never killed a soul. Marta's mouth twisted. He sends them away, far off. Quiet villages, new names, coin enough to live easy the rest of their days. Every girl who ever served that beast and kept her wits, he set her free, and let the kingdom believe he'd devoured them. Isolde stared at her. Why, she breathed. Why let them think? Because a king everyone fears, Marta said, is a king nobody looks at too closely. The rumors, the cruelty, the whole terrible legend of Alpha King Corwin. Armor. Sometimes cruelty is only armor. She'd said it herself weeks ago in the dark, not knowing whose portrait she was painting. They came for her by afternoon. Not roughly. That was almost worse. Nessa packed her few things with careful hands and wouldn't meet her eyes, and Marta stood at the gate with her jaw set hard. There was no library to say goodbye to, no pages to gather, no beast to leave one last unfinished story with. Only a carriage, and a road, and the white towers shrinking behind her marble bright against the summer sky. Isolde pressed her hand to the window and watched the castle go, and she did not cry, not yet. Because she was thinking of a man who could turn into the most feared beast in the kingdom, and who was underneath all of it simply terrified that no one would ever love the person he actually was. She'd been coming to say yes. She'd been one ray of sunlight too late. And as the castle vanished into the distance, one more thought surfaced, small and sharp and impossible to put down. He sent me away because he thinks my love is spoiled. But he doesn't get to decide that. Only I do. She didn't know yet how she'd get back to him. She only knew with the deep and certain knowing of a woman who had finally seen someone true that this was not the end of the story. Because she was a storyteller, and she had never once in all her life left a story unfinished. A year is a long time to live inside an unfinished story. And Isolde lived inside one. They gave her a cottage at the edge of the forest, the king's people did before they left her there. A quiet room with east-facing windows, a writing desk, shelves, more books than she'd owned in her whole life, and paper enough to fill 100 nights. Everything she had ever dreamed of back when she was a girl who believed in fairies. And she was miserable, because dreams have a cruel trick to them. You spend your life wanting a thing, and then it comes wrapped around the absence of the one thing you'd trade it all for. She wrote every day, page after page, cursed princes, misunderstood beasts, love that reached past the shape of a body to the soul underneath. But every story stopped in the middle, because there was no one to ask her why the princess trusted him. No one to argue that her heroine forgave too easily. No one to lean forward in a groaning chair and say, and then, the words went hollow without him to catch them. The village folk were kind enough. Distant, but kind. They called her the king's woman, in that hushed way people talk about someone who's been touched by something too big to understand. She let them. It was easier than the truth. And the truth wasn't hers to tell anyway. Isolde had been alone her whole life. She knew loneliness the way you know an old scar. But this was a new kind. Because now she knew what it meant to be seen. Truly seen. And then to have it taken away. The old loneliness had been a room she'd always lived in. This one was a door that had opened once. And closed. The news came on a late summer afternoon. The baker's wife carried it the way that woman carried every scrap of gossip in the district, like a hot coal she couldn't wait to drop in someone's hands. You've heard, I suppose, eyes bright, about the royal wedding. Isolde's heart stumbled. Wedding. The Alpha King. He's to marry Princess Ondine of the Eastern Territories. A powerful alliance, they say. The woman leaned in close, lowering her voice to a stage whisper. The ceremony's to be held right in the town square. Next week. A public spectacle. The whole kingdom invited so all can witness it. The whole kingdom. Isolde bought her bread, walked home on legs that didn't feel like hers, and that night she stood before her small mirror in the dark, and she made a decision. She would go, not to disrupt, not to plead, not to throw herself at his feet and beg him to remember the girl who told him stories. She would go simply to see him, one last time, to look at his face, both his faces, if she was honest, and wish him well. And then to close the story at last with her own two hands. Because a storyteller cannot leave a tale unfinished forever, even a sad one. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, as if the very heavens were blessing it. She dressed with care, in her finest gown, simple by noble standards, but finer than anything she'd owned in her village days. She brushed out her hair. She looked at herself a long time. By midday, the town square had become a spectacle of royal excess. Banners of blue and gold from every rooftop. Garlands of summer flowers strung across the pavilions. Guards in gleaming armor at every corner, faces hard beneath their helmets. Isolde found a place along the edge of the crowd, half hidden behind a broad-shouldered farmer and his family. From there she could see, without she hoped being seen. The nobility came first, a river of silk and jewels and careful practiced smiles. Then the bride. And Princess Ondine was everything Isolde was not. Tall, regal, moving with the easy grace of a woman who had never once in all her days been called wrong. The crowd sighed to look at her. Isolde's throat tightened. Of course. Of course he would choose a mate like that. Beautiful, powerful, worthy of an alpha king. And a small, cold question crept in behind her ribs. Had the princess done it? Had she broken the curse? Was that why there was a wedding at all? Because someone worthy had finally set him free? The sun hadn't set yet. There was no way to know. A hush fell as the royal fanfare sounded, and King Corwin appeared at the far end of the aisle, resplendent in blue and silver, dark hair gleaming. He moved with that fluid grace she'd know anywhere now because she'd seen it in two different bodies and understood at last. It was the same soul moving underneath. The crowd saw a perfect king, cold, flawless, carved from marble. But Isolde saw what they didn't. The slight tension around his eyes. The careful blankness of his face held too still to be calm. The way his hands curled into fists at his sides, and then with visible effort forced themselves flat. This was not the cold king the kingdom feared. This was her beast, the one who'd listened to her stories, who'd given her paper and quills, who'd asked her again and again to be his wife and let her refuse every single time without ever once making her pay for it. I took his place at the altar, waiting for his bride. And something in Isolde's chest cracked wide open, because she knew him, truly knew him, in a way this beautiful, worthy princess with her perfect hair and her perfect blood never could. She knew his wit, his gentleness, the way his eyes lit at a clever twist in a tale, the way he went still when a story moved him to his core. I love you, she thought, uselessly, from the very back of the crowd. I love you and I'm a year too late, and I'm going to stand here and watch you marry someone else, and then I'm going to go home and finish my sad little stories alone. That was the plan. Except, except the burly man beside her shifted, and something about the way he moved was wrong. Too controlled, too deliberate. His eyes weren't on the ceremony at all, they were scanning the guards, counting them, marking the exits. Across the square, another man did the same, his hand resting far too casually near something concealed at his hip. A cold thread pulled tight down Isolde's back. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. The royal officiant began the traditional vows, and Corwin stood rigid, his face a perfect mask. Then inexplicably his gaze lifted from his bride, and swept the crowd, and found her. For one heartbeat the mask shattered. Pain flashed across his features, raw and naked and unguarded. His face went pale, his lips parted as if to speak her name across a sea of strangers. Then with terrible effort he tore his eyes away, and turned back to the princess at his side. Isolde forced her mouth into a trembling smile, hoping he'd seen it, hoping he understood she wished him well, even as her heart folded in on itself inside her chest. The vows went on. The sun inched lower. The suspicious men in the crowd shifted into new positions. And then the world came apart. The first scream split the air like lightning. Then came the clash of steel, the snarl of shifting wolves, the thunder of boots as the royal guards surged to protect their king. Protect his majesty. Guards closed around Princess Ondine, whisked her away down a side street, a wall of armor between her and the chaos. But Corwin didn't run. He drew his sword. The blade caught the low afternoon sun and flashed. All around Isolde the crowd heaved and shoved. Someone knocked her flat to the cobblestones, and from down there on the ground, the battle became a nightmare. Attackers shifting mid-stride, fur bursting from skin, huge wolves leaping into the fray with fangs bared, royal guards shifting to meet them. But Corwin fought with steel alone. He fought with the same grace she'd seen in the beast. Different bodies, the same soul. And then she saw it. An archer, on a nearby rooftop, taking aim at the king's unprotected back. She didn't think. That was the thing she'd marvel at later, how thought had nothing to do with it. Her body simply moved. Because a year of missing him, a year of hollow, half-finished stories, a year of a closed door, all of it gathered into one single senseless act. She burst from the crowd, ran across the blood-slicked stones, and she hit him, full force, slammed into Corwin just as the arrow whistled through the air where his heart had been. They crashed to the ground together. His eyes, those eyes she'd gazed into across so many dark nights, went wide with shock. Isolde, her name, in his real voice. "You were about to be shot," she gasped, pointing at the rooftop. He shoved her behind him. "Go, please, go." His beta appeared, Garrick, blood streaking his face. "Your Majesty the sun, you must retreat, now." And Isolde glanced west. The sun hung low, a swollen red orb minutes from vanishing below the rooftops. The curse wasn't broken, which meant when that sun went down in front of the whole kingdom. "My lord," Garrick pressed, hauling at his arm, "there's no time." A massive wolf lunged, slammed Isolde back down to the stones. Teeth snapped inches from her throat, hot breath on her face, the whole crushing weight of it pinning her. She twisted, fought, couldn't move. Another man stepped up beside the wolf, spoke through a distorted, snarling voice. "Stand down, your majesty, or watch her die." Corwin froze, sword half raised. The sun touched the horizon, its lower edge began to disappear. "My king," Garrick begged, "there's no time. Leave her." "Let her go," Corwin said, and his voice was deadly quiet. "Take her." The attacker began to drag Isolde backward across the stones. "The king won't move. He hasn't the—" And that was where the man made his mistake, because he thought Corwin wouldn't choose her. He thought a king would always choose the crown, the secret, the throne, the careful mask he'd spent a lifetime building. He was wrong. The sun slipped lower, half gone now. Garrick grabbed Corwin's arm one last time. "My lord the sun, you'll change in front of all of them, you'll lose everything." And Corwin shook him off, his eyes never once leaving Isolde's. Something shifted in his face. Some old, heavy thing finally setting itself down. No, he said. Just that. No. And he lunged. The sun vanished. And King Corwin came apart in the middle of the town square in front of the whole assembled kingdom. His spine arched. Bones cracked and shifted. His perfect face elongated, teeth sharpening, jaw unhinging. Fur erupted across his skin. His elegant fingers curved into razors. The crowd recoiled in horror. A wave of screams. Nobles and commoners alike scrambling back from the sight of their beautiful king becoming a monster. Princess Ondine, fighting her guards to return, froze at the edge of it all, her face draining white. But the beast paid them no mind. Not one glance at the horrified crowd. Not one thought for the secret he'd guarded with a lifetime of fear. All that terrible power, aimed at one thing only, the wolf that held Isolde down. The beast that was Corwin fell on her captor with a fury that shook the stones. No hesitation, no care for who watched. Only rage, pure protective rage at the thing that dared threaten her. The attacker released her, shifted to meet the new threat. But he was no match. No wolf in that square was a match for what Corwin became when Isolde was in danger. It ended fast. The rebel leader lay dead. The royal guard, rallying at the sight of their king, drove the rest back and down. And in the center of the square stood the beast. Massive, grotesque, covered in blood that wasn't his. Golden eyes sweeping the silent, terrified crowd. Then he staggered, because he was hurt. Blood welled from a wound where an arrow had found its mark. His great legs trembled. Isolde got to her feet, and she walked toward the beast. Toward the monster the entire kingdom had just watched their king become. Without fear, without a single flicker of it. "You're hurt," she said softly. She reached him, placed her hands on either side of that terrible muzzle. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I'm sorry they saw. This is my fault." The beast shook his massive head. "I don't care what they saw." Pain lanced through the words. "I don't care what they think." His golden eyes found hers. "As long as you're safe." And there it was. The thing he'd said he could never believe. The thing the curse had been built to teach him. That a crown, a throne, a kingdom's fear, all of it was worth less than one person's safety. That he would rather be seen as a monster by everyone than lose the one soul who'd ever seen him true. Isolde held that ruined face in her two hands. "I love you," she said. "Beast or king, both. I love you." And something changed in the air. A charge, like lightning about to strike. Light began to pour out of him, from somewhere deep inside, pulsing brighter with each labored breath. The transformation began, but not like before, not the violent, wrenching change she'd witnessed at dawn. This one was gentle, fur receding, soft as a tide going out. Bones settling, the grotesque melting away, quiet and slow and painless. And when it finished, Corwin stood before her in the shape of a man, though the sun had long since set, though by every law of his curse, he should still have been a beast. His wedding finery hung in tatters, but his body was whole, the arrow wound, gone, healed clean. "I don't understand," he whispered. "The curse." Isolde understood. She'd understood for a while now. She'd had a year alone with nothing but stories, and stories were the one thing she'd never gotten wrong. "Only when you find a love stronger than that born for a king," she quoted softly, "will you be free." He nodded, wary. "That's what the witch told me. A love that could want the beast more than the king. And how could any love be real once you'd seen both?" "You misunderstood it," she said, gentle. "All this time, it was never about someone loving the beast more than the king." His brow furrowed. "It was about you." She held his gaze. "Loving someone else more than you loved being king." She watched it land. "When you chose to save me," he said slowly, "over keeping the secret, over the throne, over all of it. You loved me more than your own pride." She finished it for him. "More than your crown, more than the mask you'd hidden inside your whole life." Tears stood in her eyes. "That's what broke it, Corwin. Not who loved you. What you were finally willing to lose." Understanding broke across his face like a sunrise. and underneath it something Isolde had never once seen there: peace. Around them, the square had gone silent. The rebels were down. The princess had vanished, spirited away by her guards, and would Isolde would later learn, return quietly to the eastern territories. The alliance dissolved by mutual and slightly stunned agreement, because a woman does not, as a rule, wish to marry a man who transforms into a beast at her own wedding for the sake of another woman entirely. Garrick approached cautious, disbelief written across his bloodied face. He would have questions, the kingdom would have questions. But Corwin saw only Isolde, and in the middle of that ruined wedding in front of a kingdom that had just watched him become a monster and then become a man again for love. He pulled her into his arms. She came willingly, her hands rising to frame his face, the face she'd known in two shapes, the soul she'd recognized in both. "I love you," he whispered into her hair. "Beast and king, both halves of me love you." She pressed closer, felt the steady beat of his heart against hers, and the crowd, the chaos, the blood, all of it receded, until there was only this: two people who had seen past the shape of a body to the truth of each other's hearts. There is one more thing to tell you, because a story like this needs its proper ending. The kind Isolde spent her whole life believing in and never once got, until now. 1 year later, the royal ballroom glittered with candlelight, and across the polished marble floor, human and shifter danced together, something that had never in all the kingdom's history been done before. Queen Isolde stood at the edge of it all, watching her mate move through the crowd. And no fear followed him now. That was the thing that still caught in her throat when she watched it. Where once people had flinched and looked away, now there were smiles. Real bows. Corwin stopping to speak with each guest like a man, not a monster. So much had changed. Because when the truth of the curse came out, the whole kingdom had been forced to look at something it had never questioned. Their king had become the most feared thing in the land, and then been loved anyway, and something in that had quietly rearranged what an entire people believed about worth. The old order that had kept humans beneath wolves, the lacking beneath the whole, had begun to come apart at the seams. Not by decree, by example. And then there was the last thing. The thing that still made Isolde's breath catch some mornings when she woke. 3 months after their true wedding, she'd felt the first flutter of life inside her. The physicians had been baffled. The woman a whole village had once written off now carried not one child but two. A prince and a princess, sleeping soft in the royal nursery above. She liked to think it was love that worked the miracle, because her husband had married her knowing she might never give him an heir. Had chosen her wholly, in spite of the very thing the world had once held against her. But she knew in this quiet, honest place where a storyteller keeps her truest things that the babies weren't the point. That even if they'd never come, she'd have been no less whole, no less worthy, no less loved. The children were a gift, not a verdict. Because a woman's worth was never the thing her body could or couldn't do. It was the light she carried into dark rooms, the way she saw the soul under the monster, the stories she told to make the darkness bearable. She'd known that somewhere her whole life. It just took a cursed king to finally hear her say it out loud. That night at the edge of the revelry, Isolde drifted near her husband and caught the tail of his conversation with a visiting diplomat. "A riddle, your majesty," the diplomat was saying. "They say you're clever with them." "I enjoy a good puzzle," Corwin admitted with a smile. "Very well. I am held by those who cannot touch me, broken by those who never speak me, kept by those who never sought me. Kings command me, but I command fate. What am I?" Isolde went still. Her riddle, the one she'd flung out on that first terrifying night, certain she was about to die, the one she'd hidden behind night after night, too afraid to say yes. Corwin's eyes flicked to her, a small smile at the corner of his mouth. "That's simple," he said. "A promise." The diplomat laughed, impressed, and moved on. And Isolde stepped close, unable to hide her astonishment. "You knew the answer," she said quietly. "All this time." He took her hand, brought it to his lips. "Since the first night you asked me." "But you said you didn't. Every night you—" "I didn't want to force you." His eyes held hers. Curse or no curse, I wanted you to come to me because you chose to, not because a riddle ran out of dark corners to hide in. He drew her onto the dance floor, and they moved together perfectly in step, the way only two people who've learned each other's rhythm can. I love you, he murmured against her temple. My storyteller, my queen. And I love you, she said. My beast, my king. Two shapes, one soul, and a woman who'd been told her whole life that she was less finally at long last, seen exactly as she was, which is all any of us really wants, to be seen and loved anyway.